Well, welcome to this podcast. My name is Gertjan Brok. I'm one of the founders of Corpus VR. And today I'm here with my next guest, and this time it's Keith Grimes. So welcome, Keith.
Yeah, hey, John, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for making time on this summer and hot and warm day. Even the fans cannot keep up, it seems, and air conditionings. The birds are literally falling from the roofs here.
Oh, well, here I'm calling in from the south coast of England in a town called Seaford, and it's warm, but not quite as warm. It's blue skies, there's a little bit of a breeze. It's a very nice English summer we're having here right now.
Well, I want to do a quick introduction of yourself, Keith, because I'm not sure if people know you. You're, as I would say, a digital health consultant, in one word. But you did many things. You started as a GP, worked at Babylon Health as a director of clinical product management, also as a principal product manager for AI services. Even you founded VR Doctors 7 years ago, being ahead of the crowd, I can say. And more recently, you even founded Caristica, and there's a reason for that, because you also left Babylon Health quite recently. So I want to know a bit more about that, and
Sure.
maybe it's good to start with where we ended with Caristica. And I'm also curious, where did the name come from, and what does it entail? Is there a story behind it?
Yeah, well, I suppose there is a story behind it. I suppose, I don't know if everyone does this, but you always have this idea, if you haven't started your own company or anything, you always have these sort of ideas about, well, if I started something, what would I call it? And I was thinking a long time, actually, after I started up VR Doctors, I was thinking, oh, I'd like something that was maybe a little bit broader. And I used that title actually in a very, like, 1 or 2 episodes of a podcast that I did a while back. But why Curistica? Well, the first of which is that as a doctor, and particularly how I was trained as a doctor, didn't get any teaching in the classics at school, but I got teaching a lot of the classic Latin and Greek when I went into medical school, and obviously with anatomy and physiology and everything. They use classics all the time. And so I've always got a real strong association between Latin, ancient Greek, and medicine. And so the first thing was that I started looking around, and Curis, C-U-R-I-S, is Latin for care. So I went from that, and then but I also started, thinking about my own values. And one of my great values, the things that I really think describes well, is I'm really curious. I'm very curious in things as well. So the combination of curious and curiosity fit. And then there was heuristics, the idea about sort of methods of thinking and automations and so on. As it all kind of got tied together, you just whack an A on the end of it to make it sound different. And that's where we got Curistica. So I think it kind of doesn't really mean anything, but means something to me in terms of where it came from.
Yeah. It's like this nice accumulation of all the things that you stand for. Like it's based on your principles of performing within healthcare, within innovation. Like I also really like the fact that you take the term curious, and curiosity is something that I think is essential for human beings in first place, but on the other hand, it's essential for being open to new things, and being open and also being on the outlook for new things is one of the few elements that are necessary to working within the field of innovation, but also to be able to make the right decisions on seeing what can work and what cannot work. I think it's very nice term, and it's great to see it being entailed within that title of Caristica. And I think that with curiosity, looking at the technology that we are also into, using VR technology nowadays, we call it XR technologies, and Apple calls it, what do they call it?
I think they call it spatial computing, or I think they call it spatial, don't they?
Spatial computing, and they have a lot of terminology, but they try to stay away from VR and XR, like the maybe the more industry defined terminology. But you started VR Doctors, and that cannot happen overnight. It's something that triggered you to found it, first of all.
Mm.
But why did you do that? What was the curiosity that drove you to setting up the company?
Yeah, so VR Doctors, for those that don't know, is this online community that I set up way back in 2016, I think it was, and it was hosted on Facebook, still actually there. And the reason I set this up is that I'd finally managed to get VR into my clinical practice, having first been made aware of virtual reality in the early 90s. So this is, a big gap between when I first learned about virtual reality and when I actually managed to get to use it with patients. And I set it up because at that point, I'd been sort of sold this idea of what virtual reality could be when I was back at medical school in the early 90s. And for those that were around then, they'll remember some of the very early kind of VR prototypes. It was Jaron Lanier, I think, that coined the term virtual reality, I think, or at least he sometimes argues that he did or he didn't. But basically, it was all around about kind of dance and rave culture and chaos theory and all that kind of cyberspace, and the work of William Gibson, Bruce Sterling, and so on, was all kind of tied together. And I was, of course, a young student at that point, going out clubbing. So, of course, it was all everything that I loved. And I was also a gamer. So, I couldn't really hope for very much more than what virtual reality promised. But it was all promise. The reality of virtual reality in the early 90s was a bit ropey. But what was interesting is that all the ideas, all these different ways of imagining how we could interact with computers, how we could provide healthcare, all this sort of curiosity-driven exploration was still just as legitimate. It's just that we didn't have the technology to set it up. Then I went and did medicine, working in technology and medicine. But it was only really when Oculus Rift came out, when we started to get like pretty reasonable VR at low cost.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, that was the device that started it all.
Yeah, about 2012, wasn't it? 2012, 2013 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Started hearing about it, then started to use it, and it just rekindled everything as if nothing had changed. I was like, got straight back into it. I used my Samsung Gear VR for the first part. I got a dev kit, but I didn't have a very good PC, so it was all a bit.
And Samsung was ahead of the crowd as well, with that device.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And actually, that was great, because in fact, I switched from Apple to Android to get access to this, and then started experimenting with the content that was produced online in 360 video. And it was around about 2015-16 where it was a combination of me trying to get change, and we'll come back to innovation, I'm sure. The slow pace of change, combined with the fact at that point I'd been working as a doctor for a little while, and was able to start making some changes in my own practice. I just thought, well, actually, I've got a VR headset, and that was a Samsung VR headset. I have patients that have a problem that wasn't being solved. So why don't I go ahead and try and bring the two together? So I had my Samsung Gear VR headset, and I was using it at home, and I was in my practice where I worked in Eastbourne. I had patients coming in for wound care. I had nurses doing the dressings, but they would come in and they would have leg ulcers or post-operative care, and it would be quite a painful experience for them. And for those that if you don't know, dealing with wounds is one of the first use cases of virtual reality with Snow World and burns victims in particular back in the 2000s. Now, I wasn't dealing with burns victims as such, but I was dealing with patients that had quite a lot of pain. And when you're working in a practice, you can't sedate every patient that comes in. You can't even, pain relief doesn't even tend to work that well. So there's a lot of distracting them and just getting it over quite quickly. And I had one patient, a lady, who had just recently given birth. So she was breastfeeding. She wasn't taking any pain relief as a result of that. And she'd had an operation, and she had a wound that was healing up. And it was taking some time. She had to come in every day to get the wound dressing done. And she was really not enjoying it. I mean, it was very, very painful for her, and there was very little that we could do. And I still remember like speaking to her one day, and I brought my VR kit in. I was like, well, look, I've got this VR headset, and there is some evidence that this can help reduce pain in patients. Would you like to try it? We can give it a go. I'll be around. And she said, yeah, all right, I'll give it a go. So I went upstairs with her to the nurse, and we put her on Gear VR. I remember I asked her what she wanted to see, and she was a concept artist by background, so she wanted to see Cirque du Soleil. And so we put that on for her and gave her the treatment. And
where did you find that content at that time?
Oh, it was on the Samsung site. They had a lot of content that you could download. So it was just some, it was some high quality, immersive 360 video, 3 degrees of freedom, but very engaging.
Yeah.
And So I spoke to her about it, took her upstairs, put it on, and she'd previously been very distressed during this, and she didn't even notice the procedure happening. You know, she was laughing, she was enjoying it, she was talking about what she was seeing. The nurse was busy doing the dressing. The nurse managed to get it done in about half the time, and then we'd finished, but the video hadn't finished, so we let it run off at the end. The patient didn't even notice that we'd completed the work, and when she took it off, it took a moment for her to realize that actually what we'd been doing. Now, I'm not obviously saying that VR works like that for everyone, but as an introduction to what VR could do for someone, for a patient that I really couldn't help at all before, it was a real turning point for me. And so there wasn't any kind of official solution out there. So I worked on trying to see what would be safe to use with my patients with their consent, and slowly rolled it out to my patients, and found very many found similar benefits for wound care, minor procedures, like joint injections, things like that. And as I discovered more about this, I thought, well, I've got to speak to someone about this, and there's no one out there. So I set up VR Doctors.
Yeah. And find more people interested in the same subject, and maybe even already experimenting with it in the same way that you were at that time.
Absolutely. And it was all about learning about best practice, sharing best practice. And through that, I met people such as yourself, and Kiki, is it, your partner, and also met some people in the States as well, Brennan Spiegel, and got to go to some of the events out there, and Shafi Ahmed, and I just met this really lovely community, really nice community as well, and took off from there.
Yeah, great. And I think that's also one of the things that I noticed as well. From starting from the beginning, there's this group of foundation layers that are really interested in more than just the technology. It's that technology is the enabler, but you have to work with it. You have to take some risk. You say, I do it with, of course, with safety in the back of mind, with the consent of the patient, but still, you really don't know exactly what the outcome might be in some cases. So having some video or animation that is distracting is, of course, something else than giving people sedation. But still, you don't know cognitively if it would be of a certain effect that can do something else than just give the distraction for the patient. That's for example, delirious or deliriums, I must say. Excuse me. How does that play into effect? I can imagine that people like the lady you described in labor might be susceptible to that. How do you know that? Is that something that you take into account, or?
Yeah, well, the way that I did this, or the way that I did at the start, was, of course, looking at the literature that was out there already. I was aware of where it was being used, and I was using it in a very cautious, controlled way. I was using content that was made available just for the purposes of just full stop entertainment. And, I was making sure that I wasn't putting them onto a roller coaster or a horror show or anything like that. This was just gently and generally engaging content. People would either want to see something like that, or often would like to sit on a beach or something similar, and I was always weighing it up against, well, what was the alternative? And the alternative for these patients was literally trying to get it over and done with as soon as possible, trying to distract them, talking to them, which would distract the practitioner from actually being able to provide the care that they needed. And so
it takes time.
So I tried to consider it in the round as well, and said, well, look, the current status is that the patient's not potentially getting a very nice experience, but also, getting a poorer quality dressing. And one of the things that I noticed is that as we distracted patients, was that if they were less distressed and the nurse was able to focus a little bit more on what was going on, there was less motion. And so the quality of the dressing, at least objectively from the outside, was happening much better. So I tried to balance the two together. And equally, I was also aware that if I was to wait for someone to go ahead and create an application to allow me to do this, I was essentially never going to get it. There's no chance it was going to come to any of my patients, at least not in a short period of time. So it was about discussing with the patient, bringing them on board, as to the nature of the risk. Now, I obviously sought some additional input. That's why I went to VR doctors, you know, to set this up. I also spoke to my indemnity organization to understand their take on things, and they saw it as a distraction or an entertainment too. So a number of things went well for me in this regard, but sometimes you do have to take a step into the unknown.
Yeah, but you do have to dive into the subject of the technology. Yeah, that's something that you say you're a gamer by heart as well as much as a doctor. The combination of those two elements, I think, is essential for you to be able to assess the application of VR in that at that time for that specific purpose. And you needed to be able to let go of existing perceptions and maybe even processes or systems that were out there that you used to be using, like using sedation or any other application. And now you said, well, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to take that risk. It's a weighted risk. It's in that case for you, well, it's a very low risk application, but still there's this risk. But you knew, okay, with everything I set out, it's probably going to go into the right direction. Nowadays, when you look at any form of technical innovation, the amount of risk that is seen in such applications seems to be growing by the day. Like the risk adverse mindset is also holding back people from trying out something like what you did in that time with their patients. They're like, oh, and what is the effect, and what will happen, and what if something goes wrong, and how do I cope with that? I'm not certain if this is the right way to go, so I will stay with
and there can be a lot of disincentives to try something new. I think I mean, this is a story that's told time and time again in the world of innovation, that quite often when a new way of doing things comes along, particularly one that's very different to the existing mode of practice, apart from the sort of uncertainty and suspicion of what's going on, there's also a lot of kind of powerful disincentives to doing it, because you're part of a system that's set up to operate in a very specific way, you know. And this isn't, there's no kind of conspiracy in this. It's just the way of things is that you have to provide care in a certain way. I get indemnity in a certain way. I have to use certain products. They're provided by certain people. So why would I use other products that aren't provided by those people? There's all these things that all set up this kind of culture that makes it difficult to change. And then if you add on top of that heavy workload and busyness, your ability to be creative and curious goes. You just have to get your head down and keep going. It's why I'm such a big proponent of trying to increase the amount of space and time for people to do their work, because you need space to think things differently. And I was fortunate in that particular regard about the things that came together. But if we don't provide people with that, particularly because doing innovations for the first time often is less effective or less efficient than the existing way of doing things. You know, it's not surprising that it takes a long time to make
it's new, so they have to learn. They have to learn how to work with the systems. It starts by how they need to turn it on, how to set up something, the settings of a system, if that's needed, and then also something that you might relate to. Questions we also get, like how long do I have to do what type of setting with what type of exercise, and what can I expect from the results? Yeah, and that is depending on, of course, the pathology of the patient. What are you trying to treat, and how effective can you imagine it to be? So there's a lot of questions involved, and that's of course always with seeing the application of something new, like the risk. What is going to happen, and what is the effect, and how bad is then the effect going to be if it's going in the wrong direction, that I'm not
all these things have to be borne in mind, and so on. And you know, the use of 360 video in VR for the purposes of distraction is actually probably very low. You know, I recently was advising a friend of mine who is the director of a hospice
Mm-hmm.
for patients who have life-limiting
Yep.
illnesses,
Yep.
and gave him some verbal advice about how to use a Quest 2 with one of his patients who had expressly asked if they can try VR because they were very limited, and they said, "I just want to try this. I want to give it a go. I don't have this headset. They happen to have a headset, and so I just gave them some general advice on this." And people have to have agency to be able to explore some of them things themselves. If they turned around and said, "Oh yes, I want to try a tincture of something that I've taken from the garden, or a drug or anything," I might feel slightly different. But for something that's reasonably low risk, like, the only thing that was stopping the person doing it themselves was the fact that they were unable to go to a shop to buy this because of their illness. That was literally the only thing that was stopping them here. So in that situation, it's maybe the barrier is about truly empowering the patient, truly empowering someone to make decisions themselves, and stepping away from, ultimately taking responsibility yourself, or just saying,
Yeah.
"This, I'm going to facilitate you here."
Yeah, and is it also not the role that you see clinics that they need to take it up from a management level, that they could enable and empower the nurses, the therapists to be able to use these systems? Because there's, I think, also a difference in approach to the service that they're giving to their clientele. How do you look at that? Is that really a role for management to take on, or does change happen elsewhere in the companies?
I mean, it has to be a role that management takes on, and everyone has to have play their part. We're talking about a plea to be a little bit more kind of free and relaxed and open-minded, but we also have to recognize that we're working in a healthcare sector that is not going to. I struggled to get VR adopted more widely because people were asking this question, like, where can I buy this kit? Who's going to clean it? Who's going to charge it? What happens if something goes wrong? Who's going to pay for these services? Those aren't pointless questions. Those are important questions that need to be answered. The reimbursement question, of course, is the obvious one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is this going to be reimbursed? If it's not going to be reimbursed, then
golden question, eh?
Yeah. Why would I do this? And for me, with my own kit, I was like, well, I'm doing it because it's a nice thing to do, and my patients are suffering. But that's important, but that won't pay the bills and getting things sorted out as well. So
economical benefit.
So it's entirely right that those involved at all levels don't ignore the importance of answering these questions and work towards it too. You do need a little bit of kind of energy to get going. But yeah, I'd say for the managers as well who are involved in this kind of thing, it would be there's got to be some scope for trying something new. Even in a situation where you're under a great deal of pressure, I think it can be very tempting just to sort of retreat into the things that we always do. But I think that way lies stagnation, and also a degree of loss of hope as well. Like, we want to hope for something different and something new. So you got to leave a little bit of space there. That was and the creative aspects of virtual reality. And I like the fact that when I was more involved in this, I was meeting like people who work in the games industry and artists and musicians and lots of different people, and it was great to see how they can impact on health and wellness.
I recently met on an event here in the Netherlands. It's a XR for rehab event and a XR for pain event. I met this guy Ryan from Deep Well. And their approach was to healthcare with VR was from the entertainment industry. So make things fun, make things attractive, and then the clients will come by themselves. That's their approach. Instead of looking at the way to create the content from a top-down view, like, okay, we're creating something for this particular treatment, like let's say. For labor, let's say, and let's try to create an environment for that. And it might not be that fun, not that engaging, maybe not that attractive even. It might still be a good alternative to the other options that they have, but it's a different approach. Also, you see that the funding part and being able to get everything paid for, the development paid for, is that coming from the patients? Is that coming from the clinic who's paying it because we want to offer the best way of service to our clients? or is that me maybe being paid by somebody else? Maybe people who are using the same system, the same exercise as a game, and they are paying for the game. So
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's a really nice setup. I remember I came to some serious gaming events, or games for good. I can't remember. It wasn't called
your
games
game for health, maybe?
for health. Yes, I
Yeah,
came across, and of course that was across in Netherlands,
yeah.
and really enjoyed it. And I remember there was a lot of really good examples, but the one that stays with me was in World of Warcraft, which I think still is running. But World of Warcraft, someone had made a mod which gave your in-game character diabetes,
Oh,
and um, and and as a result, the more you exerted yourself, either in combat or walking, would decrease your blood glucose, and you would have to feed yourself, and you'd also have to administer insulin. And you'd say, well, what the hell's the point of that? The thing about it is that it was shown to be very effective at helping teenagers with insulin-dependent diabetes understand more about how to manage diabetes in an engaging way, because oddly enough, they would deliver care more for their in-game avatar than they might otherwise care for themselves. But along the way, they're still learning the same lessons. And I always thought that was really interesting. It was partly that, and the community with diabetes, and particularly what they did with We Are Not Waiting, where, as the tag says, they wanted to close the loop between the continuous glucose monitor and insulin pumps, something the industry was not going to do, at least not readily. And they thought, well, sod it, I'm going to do it ourselves. And they did. And through that and hacking, much to the sort of horror of the establishment, they actually built a solution that's still operating out there, and in the process drove forward the industry.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
we should be empowering the wider patient population to come up with their solutions, and we should be listening, and we should make ourselves curious and say, can I do this better? Can I do this differently? Is my resistance to this coming just from the fear of the unknown, not because I'm just like scared of moving into something else? I could be closing myself off to a better way of doing things.
Yeah, yeah. And I see totally what you mean also by looking at the established processes and systems that we have in place. And you see the big digital giants like Google and Apple and whatnot, measuring your heart rate continuously all day long with the Apple watches or the smartwatches that you have. That Samsung, of course, also has a big market in this. But those companies, yeah, I even tend to say that they have a better insight in your health than your practitioner has, or your doctor has. Like, what are those companies, and what is their role in helping you lead a healthier life? They can say, hey, you need to move a little bit more today, you didn't move enough. Gives me a bit of an insight, like through a game that gives me an insight, like on my diabetes, and how to take care of myself. Yeah, those big companies, they have a grasp on us in a way that healthcare providers don't have, and they have a lot of power, of course. And do you see anything there positively changing for us, for human beings, or do you see a threat there in comparison to normal healthcare?
Isn't it interesting? Actually, I've got a very recent story to sort of tell on that side of things. But I'm an Apple Watch user. I've been trying to quantify aspects of my own body for many years, and so I'm well aware that companies like Apple will have. I don't know how much access Apple has to that actual data on the position that they've taken, but certainly there's a lot being collected. I don't see them actually demonstrating a great deal of interest beyond certain areas, like engaging people to use the products more often and provide the functionality to allow other people to go ahead and develop things. I think that's, broadly speaking, where your Googles, Apples, and everyone else are working, in part because of the difficulty in complying with regulation, the cost and effort of doing so. So I think it makes it it doesn't make it terribly appealing for Apple to actually build medical devices off the back of their products, which is a shame because they've got great products. But what's interesting to me is another great passion of mine, a really big passion recently, is generative AI, things like large language models and ChatGPT. And just this weekend, interestingly, ChatGPT released Code Interpreter for paying users. Paying user because I like getting access to things early. And Code Interpreter is essentially, for those that don't know, well, hopefully people know what ChatGPT is, which is this large language model that you can ask questions of, and it's got sort of incredible performance across a wide area. And you've got these plugins, and Code Interpreter is this new plugin that allows it to, you can ask it to do a task and it will create a Python script or a piece of script and then run it inside a sandbox against data and then give you answers. And one of the big complaints I've always had is, so last year I started a medicine that could potentially increase my heart rate. And you'd think, well, I wear an Apple Watch, here you go, no bother, I'll be able to watch and see. It's actually very hard for me to work out whether it made that much difference. It's certainly, and I can't go to Apple and say, can you build this for me? I found it difficult to work a way into it until this last weekend. I could download all my data from Apple. I put it into Code Interpreter. I had to extract the heart rate data. So ChatGPT explained how to do it. That was the first thing. I wrote a script to extract it.
Your personal assistant as well.
Yeah, my personal assistant, yeah. Then I put it into Code Interpreter. And then I asked the question. I just said in plain English, I started this medication last year. I want you to run my average heart rate, before and after this dose and see if it actually made a difference and what was the level of the relationship. Lo and behold, it did it. And then I was able to just keep asking more questions. Actually added in my weight. Does my weight affected this? What about during the week? What about my sleep? I was able to answer very quickly things that have eluded me for an awful long time. Now, to what degree is it entirely accurate? I don't know. I need to spend some more time digging into it. But my ability to be able to use this to actually query this data myself, because my needs are personal to me, was really powerful. And it made it very easy, really. That's exciting stuff for me. That's the exciting side of it, is that the tools get pushed out in the same way that we kind of had with the We Are Not Waiting group and so on. And this is where I think the most exciting future of healthcare is not just empowering patients to self-care with the tools that we choose to give them, but it's patients taking control with the tools that they have access to, and us working with them to facilitate that. That, I think, is the really exciting future of healthcare.
And you've been working with AI for a while within Babylon, and now with Curistica. You're also trying to harvest all these nice, powerful elements, VR, XR, AI, together to help managers, but also healthcare professionals, to be able to make use of these systems and to help them and guide them, I think, in this process.
Yeah, so you're right, and I think you've sort of come onto an area that I'm particularly interested right now about using large language models like ChatGPT or foundation models. With a chat interface. And that parallel between learning how to use Google. When Google, I remember when Google first came out, and I remember, trying to use Google in the same way that I did previously, because of course, for those that remember, prior to Google, finding things on the internet was very much about using like a tree-based system, and companies like Yahoo would hire people to basically build taxonomies of the internet. You had to submit your website to be fitted into this tree. And then Google comes along and, with their page ranking mechanism, all of a sudden everything changes. But you still need to understand how to speak to Google to get better and to get the right answers. I have to ask the right question. And that's a skill that people have learned, I think, over many years. Some people are better, some people that's less good. Big part of what you do as a doctor actually is helping people understand, about Google searches and so on. It's going to be exactly the same with large language models and foundation models like GPT. But here's the thing, it's prompt engineering. And so I've spent a lot of time sort of studying and practicing this, learning from others and trying to implement this, and currently putting together a course that I'm teaching, or beginning to teach as of this week, on clinical prompt engineering, to try and teach healthcare professionals the basics of what large language models are, about how to use them, what the benefits are, what the risks are, so you can use them in the right way, and then how to start asking the questions and getting it to do what you want it to do. And there is an art and a science to that. And once you start learning the basics of how to ask these questions, the quality of the answers significantly increases. Your ability to be able to ground the answers in a certain way or in the format that you want improves. And you start to learn a little bit more about the incredible power of these technologies in healthcare or anywhere else. So we can start working out, how can we use this? Because the thing that you were talking about there, you know, the ability to be able to take a complex medical letter and turn it into something that would be more patient friendly, is something that consumes a lot of time from doctors. You know, if I convert it one to the other, and as a result, it's something that I might not do well. I might not get around to everyone. The people that I send it to may have other questions, but they're waiting to speak to me. So wouldn't it be nice if, instead of me sending out a letter that I've done myself, that I basically connect the person to AI, that they can explain it to them in the way that they want, and then they can, as much as they would, as many times as they want, ask questions, clarifications. It becomes more of a kind of conversation, not just like a fire and forget, but you know, this is what happened after your recent thing. This is what we do next. What does that word mean? Why am I taking this medicine? And if we can get the AIs to understand the limits of their knowledge and hand over appropriately, won't the conversation be better? Won't people understand more? And therefore, you would hope have better health outcomes as a result.
Yeah.
I had a really good example. It's like, well, speaking to a large language model and creating a prompt is a little bit like employing a contractor, and you're allowed to send them one email a day and they cannot reply, and you have to tell them what to do in that one email a day. Now, if you had to do that, you'd be very careful about what you said. You'd like say, well, today I want you to do this. And then you'd probably put a few steps in there and things to check how they're getting on and so on. And in some ways, writing a prompt is a little bit like that. It's about formulating and understanding exactly what it is you want this other thing or person to do, and making it nice and clear. It's interesting, like following artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence seems to be a constant redefinition of what constitutes intelligence, to make it that humans are the ones that have it, you know, and as computers get better at some other areas, you say, well, that's impressive, but that's not intelligence, that's something else. The bit that humans do, which is left, that's intelligence.
Yeah,
and
because we're creative, etc.
Yeah. But over time, all of that kind of gets chipped away. And then the next thing, of course, is that, well, if it looks to all intents and purposes like it's intelligent, even if it isn't, by your definition, ultimately, who cares? Like if it's doing something of value. I think, you know, when you talk, like, a person's considered intelligent if they can recall a lot of facts. You could say, well, actually, fact recollection is not intelligence. It's just rote learning. It's just like, you know, so we should remove from humans that as a definition of intelligence. That's not intelligence. That's just taking things from, you know, the storage. Now, I know memory is more than just storage. There's a lot more to it than that. The question then is, what is it that's uniquely powerful about human intelligence, if you want to call this, and what bits are powerful about machine intelligence, artificial intelligence? And if we can work those bits out and then get them working together, so you get the best of both, then you're in a great position. You know, for example, how, like, I will very, very, very frequently use a machine to do my calculations, like maths. I'll use a calculator. I've been doing that for many years. I'll sometimes do some like basic maths to try and work out roughly where it will be. But if it's actually meaningful stuff, I'll use a spreadsheet. So, you know, I don't rely on my mathematical abilities for a great deal as well. I've incorporated that for a long time, to the point now that I don't think anyone would consider that augmented intelligence, that I'm using a calculator. But of course it is. And as a result, I can achieve that bit more. I always use the example of, like, when things, like, over time, what we consider to be artificial intelligence, we either redefine what intelligence means on the human side, or we just forget about it and we just absorb that it happened. And I always give the example is, like, imagine you went to an accountant and the accountant said, oh, I'm a special kind of accountant. I'm an accountant. I do things the old-fashioned way. I don't use any calculators. I don't use any spreadsheets. In fact, I don't even use a computer. I use pen and paper, the way that, you know, generations of people managing numbers have over the centuries. That's what I do. And and because it's so bespoke, I charge an awful lot more for this as well. I guarantee that person wouldn't get much business. In fact, you'd probably think they were crazy for doing it. But they're using technology to do this core thing. we're going to see more and more of that. And in my own clinical practice, for example, decision support like prescribing, I rely very heavily on machines and automations to tell me if I'm prescribing something that might interact with a medicine they're already on, or any contraindications on the record. I'll use my own knowledge as well, but I'll use that as backup. I use it so often I forget that it's there. But of course, it hasn't always been there.
No.
And at one point, people were saying, well, they'll never do this. So, you know, this augmented intelligence is going to constantly creep forward. And my prediction is that we'll either forget that we ever thought it was a problem, and we'll be redefining what it is to be intelligent along the way. Yeah. And in the meantime, we'll be doing lots of amazing things.
Yeah, and I also see that from the perspective of knowledge and how we perceive the world, also how we perceive the patient is interesting. Like from the perspective of physical therapy, for example, a lot of the physiology or the physical part of the body movements have been deconstructed into axis. So well, we move along the lateral flexion, the rotation, anti-flexion, etc. We narrowed it down to all these different axes. And why? I think partially because as humans, we are incapable of directly recording and also looking at the 3D motion that we create as humans. It's too complex for us to comprehend and to process. But for a computer, that is no problem. We see that as well with 3D sensors on the body. We can easily recreate the 3D movement in the computer, and it can be analyzed. It can make a comparison between your previous movement and the current movement, something that is really hard for us human beings to do in the old-fashioned way. And that's, I think, that's speeding up that part of the process as much as spreadsheets has sped up and improved also quality-wise, reduction of errors, the work of accountants and people working in the financial field.
Even biologically speaking, a human brain, we've deprecated a huge amount of our thinking to different areas. Our cerebellum, for example, is just this big motor processor stuck at the bottom of our brain. We send it instructions saying, can we move our hand here? Can we do this? All the sums, all the maths, all the neural impulses and the balances is all handled by this other thing, you know. Yeah. And, you know, it's still incredible, and it's still not a computer, but it's behaving a little bit like that. It's just like an outsourced area that does a bunch of calculations and controls these different areas. And, you know, we just observe and perceive the results as well. I like what you say about the fact that we've sort of decomposed things into flexion, anti-flexion, and so on. But of course, these are just kind of composites of the action of a number of muscles over a joint or something like that. And depending on the nature of the injury, you may actually you don't want, you know, to flex at the elbow. You actually want some sort of flexion and rotation. Of course, expert physical therapists and physicians and advanced nurse practitioners and so on will understand this on a kind of grounded level, on an intuitive level, but we don't have enough of those. And in the meantime, we've had to simplify it to allow other people to do it in a different way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also where maybe the artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence can help in maybe perceiving patients also from a more holistic view. Yeah, so more the totality of the person instead of zooming in on the issue at hand. Yeah, that's interesting. And when looking at how we do it here in the Netherlands and in the UK, where you are, we seem to be also a bit constrained by all the regulations. So we talked about it briefly in the beginning, but it's also about, well, bending some rules sometimes and seeing what is possible. Looking more globally, there are some countries that really stand out. Is there a country from your perspective that you say, okay, this country is really leading the pack in this area, in the area of innovating healthcare?
When I in being asked that question, it's a really interesting question, because it's a difficult one for me to answer based on a really deep understanding of the regulatory environment in that territory. So it's a hard thing for me to answer. But what I do look at as I look at, for example, when I was working at Babylon had a company called Babyl, B-A-B-Y-L, that was providing telemedicine in Rwanda. And And that was really quite innovative, because what they did is that they provided feature phone-based services for people. There's around about 3 million of the population, where people who had subscribed to this sort of social insurance there would have access to going to a health center and then be able, or being able to phone on a feature phone, speak to a nurse or a doctor, have prescriptions sent via SMS. There was a lot of SMS-based technology that would facilitate their ability to have care in physical centers and so on. And in a country that was otherwise really challenged in terms of delivering healthcare, they were able to really accelerate the provision of care through technology that actually is not the same as we have in the UK or Netherlands with smartphones. It's much more feature phone based. Yet they were actually achieving great things with SMS and other technologies because they're unencumbered by what's been happening there already. And then I hear similar of countries such as India as well, where real innovations are being embedded at scale quite quickly because of the absence of the sort of legacy foundations that are in place.
Yeah.
And I think part of the pace of change is driven by need as well. There's the ability to be able to deliver care to their populations in some low and middle income countries is certainly less than it is in the countries that you and I live in.
Yeah.
That's allowing them to sort of take a more risk tolerant approach to how they're implementing things. And as a result, actually accelerating care. And that there are aspects of how access, I have some patients who are able to access care in India that they just cannot get in the UK at all, access to their records and so on. And that's not universal. There's patchy problems elsewhere, but you're certainly seeing acceleration, and certainly in China, it's similar as well. And a friend from Israel showed me what they're achieving there as well. So around the world, people tearing ahead, in part because of differences in need, in part because of the absence of like legacy to get past, and in part because the regulatory environment. So I think around the world there is some acceleration, and that's why I believe that generative AI, like your chat GPT, proves a really interesting moment, because Europe is with its AI Act is bringing in really quite, firm guidance on how that technology is going to be used in healthcare and everything else. The US is beginning to sort of differentiate itself a little bit with the talk of non-device status for decision support. And then other countries are moving ahead with the use of generative AI in their own way. And if they are successful in delivering valuable healthcare, isn't it going to be interesting to see, well, what's the EU going to do in the face of that?
Yeah.
If progress is being made elsewhere? I think we've got some interesting times ahead of us.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and it's also the socio-economical challenges in some of these areas is at the same time it's a struggle, but it also drives the innovation and the need for innovation as well. Yeah, so here in Western Europe and the UK, we can say, well, we are currently in a good system. Our healthcare quality is quite up there. So the need to quickly improve it is way lower than in these other countries where the challenge is.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
But our healthcare is getting worse.
Oh, is that true?
This is the interesting point, is that you're right. I think we may start from a baseline, but we're seeing across the Western world a deterioration in life expectancy, a perception that healthcare delivery is deteriorating. We're seeing fewer people, like more people leaving healthcare, difficulty in recruiting, real challenges to quality of care, and also economically speaking, real challenges in being able to fund care the way that we've always funded care. There's a really interesting thing when they look at, in the UK, they've got a long-term workforce strategy, which has come out for the first time detailing for the next 15 years how they hope to staff the healthcare system. And what's important about it is that they're doing a lot of changes that some people are very unhappy about. Like they're talking about very substantially increasing the number of people providing care. But it's not more doctors per se. but it's more doctors trained through apprenticeship schemes, or doctors through shorter schemes, or physicians associates or physicians assistants. And that's been a hot topic in the last few days in the UK because of an incident where someone came to grief as a result of this. So there's a sort of, there's a range of different skills being provided, but that's different to how we did it before. I have some sympathies with this sort of proposal because I, simply speaking, don't think we can't afford to provide care just with doctors the way that we have them right now, and so on, particularly because like having a highly skilled and highly paid doctor providing a service that could otherwise be provided by someone equally as well but at a much lower cost actually makes more sense in terms of being able to provide the service to everyone. Now, I dwell also on the side of making sure that we increase automation as well, because ultimately I think we need lots more automation. But it's interesting because right now we want to have things a certain way. We've had our healthcare a certain way. We just need to do it again, but more money in this area. I don't think there's the money. And the demand is getting higher. So yeah. I actually think that if we look to low and middle income countries and say, oh, well, we've got good care, they've got challenges, no wonder they're moving faster, we're going to need to borrow back from their advances very soon, I suspect. And so this is why it's important to take a global perspective and learn from the best territories, regardless of what their traditional economic setting is.
Yeah. That reflects to me a bit like the story you told about the accountant who is doing things the old-fashioned way and keeps doing it, but his amount of client is increasing, and he is unable to provide the best service to all of them because of the way he used to work. And that's, I think, that's an interesting take on this.
And so can you imagine what would happen in that situation as you say, well, maybe what people should learn to do is take care of themselves, and we will only send the most urgent stuff to this accountant, and there'll be a long wait, but that will help separate out the people that really need my help versus the people that can probably take care of it themselves. And that sounds very familiar to how it is right now. Is like, well, we can't make healthcare too accessible because there's a lot of minor things, and we don't need to see that. I think people present to healthcare sometimes for less acute problems, but there's always a reason for it. It's always kind of harder to contact healthcare than not contact healthcare. Yeah, and I think that point is lost on a lot.
Yeah, and it's also about are we focusing on the cure, or are we focusing on maybe the preventive part of healthcare as well? So that's a big topic. It has been, I think, for a couple of years already, certainly here in Western Europe, but not really a lot is being done on that end. And of course, it's better to prevent than to cure. But and that would also have a positive effect on lowering the load on the healthcare professionals and on the entire system. Wouldn't we need to do more on that end, help people to prevent things from getting worse?
Yeah, but that would also require a greater commitment to long-term thinking as well. And one of the problems that we've just talked about a 15-year plan, but this is a 15-year workforce strategy plan from a UK government that many people feel is not going to be around much longer than the end of next year. And this sort of turnover in governments, one of the wonderful side of democracy, but one of the downsides is that it doesn't really foster long-term thinking. No. And for prevention, we really do need long-term thinking. So how do we crack that one? I suspect that's in part why it's harder to do, because any government is going to have to invest in something that by definition is not going to pay off for 10, 20 years or so on. And as a result, they may just be criticized for spending the money now and not seeing any results.
Yeah, exactly.
Hence it shifts everything that
they need to score. And they need
you need to land something just now. That's a really difficult one to fix or sort. I don't really have any kind of solutions to that beyond, again, the ability to be able to empower people to make the right decisions. Maybe for less explicit reasons, like, lose weight because it will reduce your risk of heart disease. But there'll be other ways of passing on that message that's more likely to see a behavioral change. using VR to get fit, for example, is a sneaky way of
yeah.
getting fit because it's great fun. And then along the way, you also happen to get fit.
Yeah, people losing weight by just playing Beat Saber, and yeah. So that's absolutely true. It's also a bit about psychoeducation, helping people to really learn the effects of habits within their lifestyle adjustments. But that's a complete different topic. But there's so
I'll be for our
much
the next podcast. I'll have to
yeah,
think
net
about,
podcast. Let's take that.
think about some answers, because that's a really, really tricky area, you know, and
Yeah,
might have to ask ChatGPT what to do about it.
yeah, maybe let's do it, and then if it comes up with an answer, we'll use that as
Maybe we'll use
that
that.
podcast. But yeah, and what is, in your opinion, the maybe the biggest is not the right way of phrasing it, but the most important impact of AI and VR and related smart technology like biofeedback sensors currently, and how would you see that being of an impact maybe in 5 or 10 years? Of course, that is a big leap into the future, and we know how fast AI is currently developing, how fast VR is developing, but 5 or 10 years, what is the biggest difference between now and then, and what would you see would be the biggest benefit of the developments that we are now maybe at the beginning of, that would be done in 5 to 10 years time?
I think we'll start with VR, I suppose, and anything I say here might be blown out the water by VR plus AI, of course. But VR right now, we're at a point where we've got Quest 2, Quest 3 coming on its way. We've got Apple's new headsets coming in. So I think that there's going to be an injection of pace next year as we start getting more hardware out. And the growth of VR, I think, has always been sort of tied to consumer adoption. And it hasn't been like a hockey stick. It's been sort of more gradually growing along the way, and I suspect that VR has got an element of sort of stickiness of people using it as well. People sort of settle into a certain area, but there is quite a lot of hope behind what Apple will bring to this, because Apple don't invest lightly into an ecosystem, and also their intelligence about how to build a compelling user interface means that I think we'll probably get more people, cost of the headset aside, but more people adopting Apple's approach to the user interface, meaning that you'll get more compelling experiences in lower cost headsets, which means that we'll start seeing some more compelling use cases and people more comfortable with using this, at which point I think it's going to be more likely that any of the VR technologies that we use for healthcare, either ones that you can draw down yourself for health and wellness, or those that are prescribed, are more likely to be in place. I think we're already seeing some suppliers sort of getting better at providing a kind of managed solution as well. So I think that that's going to improve a great deal. I think social VR was always one that I thought that was kind of underutilized, in part because I was always impressed with how people would interact in virtual reality together and the sort of shared space, particularly for group therapy. So I think that you might see a little bit more of that if there's a successful social VR or XR environment out there. And I think that, it all kind of depends on, the adoption of the hardware ultimately, because
is there one platform now that does social VR right, or maybe
VR, I think VR chat
is the best platform?
Yeah. Well, it's basically it's because it's kind of the most adopted and the most flexible, really, isn't it? And I know that people will go off and make crazy environments, but within that they've also delivered people great tools, and as a result there's been a sort of really open development schedule of people to be able to sort of develop their own avatars and the like. So I think that is where I think a lot of it will come for, and in the mental health space, for people with identity disorders, gender identity, and so on and so forth. I think social VR can be really helpful. So I maybe watch that area. The mental health area is going to be it. I think I've always got an affinity for the idea of using virtual reality and the growth of psychedelics and mental health as well, because psychedelics are proving to be increasingly effective at treating different mental health disorders, but they're of course very dependent on the setting that you have. And then virtual reality is an incredibly good way of controlling the setting. So
you can do sort of a dry run with psychedelics and turn it on, turn it off.
Yeah. Or just using the VR as on top of the psychedelics as well,
Okay.
or augmented reality on top of it as well. Because remember, it's about controlling the setting that allows you to sort of get a person into the right experience. So I think VR's sort of got a more sort of like linear trajectory. AI, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's, you know, it all depends. Everything seemed to got a bit quiet since earlier on this year in terms of general public conversation about this. I think once your Microsofts and Google start releasing Office suites with AI built in, I think that's when it's going to really pick off in the sort of public side of things.
You see that happening right now as well. As some software is using the marketing machine. So like, hey, we have AI included now in our system. It can help you write messages, create an image, anything. And in Office, it's coming up as well.
Yeah, I certainly use generative AI for my presentations quite a lot with Midjourney to create images, because I get exactly the image that I want with the permissions to use it in a way that's harder to achieve with stock imagery and so on, you know. So I use that a great deal. I use ChatGPT to help review some of the content that I create, just to give me suggestions as to how to, you know, improve it. I don't generate my original content that way, but it's an extra sort of set of eyes on it afterwards. I think in terms of healthcare, I suspect that we're going to see quite, like, officially, we'll see a reasonable amount of decision support tools coming out and back office support, you know, automating routine bureaucratic tasks and so on. Unofficially, I think we're going to see a huge amount of large language model use. I think patients are going to start using it a great deal themselves. I think doctors and healthcare professionals will be using it off the books for right or wrong. And this is why it's so critically important that we teach people how to use it safely and when, you know, the care that they should take. I think we're going to see a great deal more of that. We'll probably also see a lot of work done to constrain, like, some fine-tuned models that are very specific on certain data sets with low levels of hallucinations. And I think at that point we might see really, really significant pressure on regulatory systems to try and find a way to adopt them. That I think is going to be the spicy moment.
Yeah. So some challenges ahead, but a bright future maybe after all.
Yeah, I think put it this way, right now with I know how to code, but not terribly well. But I was able to, early on when ChatGPT-4 came out, build a Telegram bot that was able to triage people using Telegram. You know, you use Telegram anywhere in the world, put your symptoms, it would triage the outcome. And I didn't know how to write that in create a bot. I was talked through it by ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT would provide the triage outcome as well. And that took me 45 minutes. Yeah. We're entering a strange time. Healthcare professionals and patients themselves will be able to create applications in a way that they haven't been able to before and share them. And with real excitement also comes some real risks as well. But I'd like to stay on the optimistic side of it as well and say, actually, we're going to see lots and lots of different ways of doing care. That's one of the great joys about having spent time in technology, is there's always, whatever you think about technology, someone's always going to use it in a different way, and it's always going to be much better than you thought. So I'm looking forward to that.
So I want to thank you, Keith, for this exciting talk. And we discussed a lot of different topics from starting with VR, ending up with the future of AI in healthcare and everything in between. Maybe it's interesting as well for people. Where can they find you on Choristica? Do you have a website?
Yeah. Well, the best thing to do is always to, the first point of contact, as long as Elon Musk doesn't destroy it, is Twitter. So it's at Keith Grimes. That's KeithGrimes. I have a Linktree account which has a lot of my other contact details, which I'll share with you maybe for the show notes.
Yeah, we will do it in the description. Yeah.
And then LinkedIn. Choristica.com is my website. It's not a terribly impressive website. I've been too busy dreaming of the future than to actually build my website. But
can ChatGPT maybe build the website and you focus on the important stuff?
That's what I should be doing. Actually, I should be getting something else, something or someone else to do it. But I'm very happy just to reach out with me, and I'll give you. I might maybe give you some other details to put in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you, either just to sort of discuss things, or if you have the need, of a person that's spent a long time working in medicine and technology and products and everything, that is rather creative and curious, and willing to work with people to envisage what the future of healthcare might look like, get in touch.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks again, Keith. And I will share all the details, including the link to VR Doctors on Facebook as well.
Of
And
course, yes.
yeah, because I absolutely love that community, and it is something that keeps itself alive as well.
It does actually. It's
a living organism,
self-sustaining. It's a perpetual motion machine.
Exactly. All right. Thanks again. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for listening. Hope this was as interesting for us as it was to you, or the other way around. And hope to see you and hear you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I'll see you around.
Bye-bye.